Are you interested in eating a whole food plant-based diet, but are concerned about the sticker price of some of the products in the store? I'm Hannah Mason, and in this video, I'm going to show you our biggest cost-cutting measure that takes so little time, you'll be in shock. And that is Mason's famous sourdough. Show you two really simple things that are very easy for you to procure. One, this is the sourdough starter, and if you could smell it, I would tell you that it sort of smells like cheese and it sort of smells like beer, and that's a good thing. If you are ever handed a sourdough starter, or if you ever have a sourdough starter hanging out in your refrigerator and it smells something like locker room, throw it away. And the other ingredient is flour. This is just a bag of whole grain spelt flour. In our family, we really like using spelt. It has a nutty taste. It's much easier to digest than wheat. And I personally have a difficult time digesting wheat, so this is what we buy. I also like buying organic grains because one of the things that people don't necessarily know about the challenge of pesticides and herbicides is that sometimes pesticides and herbicides are used in a very minimal amount and it might not necessarily be the biggest deal. And other times herbicides are used so strongly and they leave so much of it on the grain that you really want to be careful about ingesting such chemicals. So it just so happens that wheat has one of those problems. When wheat grows, it grows all throughout the winter as a little grass and throughout the spring as a taller and taller grass until you get the telltale wheat that's just like a long stalk with this grain on top and it blows beautifully in the wind. And eventually that wheat needs to be cut. And this is true for oats, barley, rye, spelt, and all these other ancient grains like einkorn or wheat. Any of these grains have the exact same process. They grow for many months and then you have to cut them. And normally what farmers do is they leave them out on the field because the grain has to fully dry. Because once it's fully dry, then you can has a really long shelf life and you can have wheat berries that sit on the shelf and eventually then you grind them into flour. But if the grain is still wet when you put it in a silo, so then it just becomes a really great place for mold and bugs to go hang out because it's this wet grain, and where wet, dark stuff is, things go bad. So it's really important to farmers that they're able to leave their grain out to dry. For how long? Like 2 months. And that's a really, maybe even 3. I don't know exactly, but it's a long time. And because it's such a long time, there are so many things that can go wrong. There are pests that can come and eat the grain. There's rain that could come down and wet the grain and have it go moldy. And it's one of the big challenges of growing a grain like wheat. Now, here in the land of Israel, it's not such a big deal because during the summer months, we get 0 rain. But in most parts of the world, it's always like touch and go. They don't know what's going to happen. So one of the things that farmers have started to do is spray their wheat with an herbicide called Roundup. Roundup is produced by a company called Monsanto, and Roundup kills herbs, it kills plants. And so what Roundup does is it kills the wheat, and because the wheat is now dead, it totally loses all of its water and it dries out really fast. And then a farmer can bring it in and put it in his silo and everything's good. Sort of. Now the challenge is the grain is absolutely covered in Roundup, and Roundup has been shown in studies to mess with the digestive tracts of human beings. And so it can actually create a hole in your digestive tract, which is part of why we're seeing so many cases of celiac and other digestive disorders, because Roundup is covering not just wheat, but also corn and peanuts and soy. Unless they're organic. If they're organic, Roundup isn't being used at all. So one of the things that I would say for sure buy is organic grains. And because I'm teaching you how to make bread so cheaply, it's totally worth getting your flour organic because the price difference is not that huge compared to the price difference between buying a loaf of bread and making it yourself. So this is what we do in our family. We make sourdough bread, and you're going to want to know, what on earth is this stuff that I told you smells like cheese or beer? So what this is basically a dough. if you take flour and water and you mix it together and you leave it out, the same thing will happen that happens to any sugary food if you leave it out. Eventually, the bacteria and the yeasts that are naturally occurring in the air around you and all over your skin, by the way, and also inside your body, by the way, all the time, they're just like, ooh, sugar, that looks yummy. And they come and they infest the food. This is how yogurt is made. This is how any fermented food is made. And it's also, if you just leave a fruit salad on the counter overnight, or even a little bit of fruit on the counter overnight, you're also going to notice that it starts to smell a fermented smell. It starts to smell like alcohol. And it's for the same reason, because the bugs that are naturally occurring in the air come and start to break down the sugars. And this is a really good thing, because digestion can be challenging for human beings sometime. And so it's kind of nice when some other creature outside of us digests food for us, especially a difficult to digest food like a whole grain. So what you do is, if you want to make your own sourdough starter, you take flour and water, mix it together into a dough, cover it with a wet cloth and leave it on the counter. And just make sure that the cloth stays a little bit damp for a few days. And eventually you're going to have your own sourdough starter. I have never successfully been able to do that. I always end up with something that smells like moldy locker room. So I always get my starter from someone else. And if you just reach out to your community, or you reach out online, or you even want to buy some starter online, it's totally worth it. Because once you have starter once, you can use it literally for the rest of your life. Unless you're Jewish, in which case once a year you have to replace it, because on Passover we get rid of all of our leavening. So that's exactly what this is. This is leavening. So you'll see that there's lots and lots of bubbles in this dough, and I've been moving it around, so I've been kind of shaking the bubbles out of it. But what happens is, as the bacteria and yeast are breaking down the grain, they're actually making it more soupy, and they're actually making it easier for us to digest. So those are two really great things. Now, as they're digesting the grain, they fart, basically. And when they fart, they make bubbles in the dough. And all of those bubbles are exactly what you see whenever you eat any kind of bread, whether it's a sourdough bread or just a normal yeast bread. All of those bubbles are the farts that the yeast and bacteria made in breaking down the grain. Now, there happens to be this one species of yeast that farts a ton. It's like a crazy fart machine for not having broken down the grain very much. And because of that, you can get a very quick rise with a grain that's still pretty much intact. And that's really fantastic if you want to make a really fluffy bread and you don't care about digestion. And that's the yeast that you buy in the store. But if you care about having food that you can more easily digest and that's been broken down for you so you don't have to work as hard, and so the bread doesn't just like sit in your stomach like a rock, so sourdough is a really great way to go, because it's got a whole symbiotic environment of bacteria and yeast and all sorts of interesting dudes going on in there. So how do we make our bread? We take our starter, put it into a bowl, mix it with water, and take about a cup of water into that bowl, and you mix it around. If you are not pressed for time, so then just don't even mix it. Just leave the bowl to the side and go do something else for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. It really doesn't matter. After about 10 minutes, the dough is going to totally, the starter is going to totally dissolve into the water. And that's really good because it'll be easier to mix that way. Then you're going to add flour, and I would say about 2 cups of flour, but as you're mixing, you're going to see, oh, maybe I need more or less. What's really cool about sourdough is, unlike yeasted bread, it's so flexible. It'll do whatever you want it to do. So you just mix it in until you have a dough that's a bit thicker than this consistency. It's not going to be as dry as a yeasted bread dough. And before you add the flour, I forgot to mention, make sure that you have a tablespoon of salt per kilo of flour, or half a tablespoon of salt per pound of flour. And the salt is important because it helps with rising and also helps with flavor, and you want your food to taste good. Nice. So some people like to add olive oil into their dough to make it like a little bit tastier, but it doesn't affect the bread or the rising at all, and it's totally not necessary. So you mix all of that together, and once it's mixed together, you take some of it and you put it back into your container, close your container, and put it in the refrigerator so that you can use it next time. Now you want to make sure you use your sourdough at least once a week. And if you notice that more than a week is passing before you can use your sourdough, so just add some flour and water into your container and mix it all in so that the dude's in there. This is like a petri dish, and this is a pet. You got to feed it, right? Because if they don't have new flour to eat, they're just going to keep breaking down the old flour. And you'll go from having a sourdough starter to having beer. And then eventually that beer is going to turn into vinegar. And you can't use that anymore. That will no longer help your grain to rise. You want to keep it at the level that it's still thick and bubbly and cheesy smelling. Great. So then the rest of your dough, you're either going to put on a silicone sheet or a sheet of baking paper to make a focaccia, or you can put it into a silicone baking pan or muffin pan for making bread. We tend to bake our bread at about 400 degrees for about 30 minutes. Obviously, if you have a thinner dough like a focaccia, it'll probably be closer to 20 minutes. If you have a thicker dough, it might be a little bit longer, and it depends on your elevation and what your oven is like. So you want to just keep testing it and to see exactly what temperature and time is right for you. But I forgot to mention the most important thing, and that is that we put the dough into the oven, but we don't turn it on until hours later. So usually we make our bread at night, and in the morning we get the oven going, and the dough has had all night long to rise and to break down. So a yeasted bread can rise in just a couple hours, but sourdough takes a good 8 hours. And because it's taking so long, you really get a dough that tastes more sour, but is also so much easier to digest. And that's what we notice with all of the people that come through our home. We have hundreds of people coming through our home every year, and they always say, wow, this bread tastes good, but it's also, they feel like it's lighter on their systems and it's easier to digest. So if you notice that maybe you're sensitive to gluten, it could be that it's not gluten you're sensitive to, it's wheat. And you can try using spelt and see how your body feels with that, and try with sourdough and see if it's even better. So hopefully this recipe helped. You can also find a more in-depth recipe where you actually see me making the bread on YouTube. Just look on my YouTube channel, Hannah Mason Vitality Coach. And if you're looking to take your vitality up a notch and want some support in doing so, get in touch with me. I'm a vitality coach. You can contact me here on Facebook or YouTube, or at my website, hannahmason.com. And if you feel like you want to move forward towards health, but just keep getting stuck and stuck and stuck, it could be you've got beliefs blocking you. So I highly recommend you check out my health quiz, hannahmason.com/health quiz. It'll only take you a few minutes to take the quiz so you can see what you can do. What are the beliefs that are getting in your way, and what beliefs can you undo to move your vitality to the next level? In the meantime, I wish you many little joys.
Want to find out what's blocking your vitality? Quickly take the quiz at hannahmason.com/health quiz.